Western Teacher Live, talking about public education, unionism and much more.
Hello and welcome to Western Teacher Live, the podcast of the State School Teachers Union of Western Australia. Today we're going to discuss teaching tips for new educators. One of the great benefits of being a member of the SSTUWA is that you have access to a fantastic growth team who support new educators as they take their first steps in teaching, as well as a peer group that has been there, done that and worn the t-shirt. To take us through some invaluable tips to either get started on the right foot or maybe even assist with a reset as we move through Term 3, I'm delighted to welcome Growth Team Coordinator Chloe Hosking and Growth Team Officer Nicola Sorrell. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you, Bob.
Chloe, teaching tips are just one aspect of the support the Growth Team provides to our members.
Yeah, so look, all of our members can access, advice and support and protection from their union. But the growth team is there to especially look after new educators because we know the first few years of teaching have their own unique challenges and we want to make sure you get through them and you get through them well. So the growth team is there to look after pre-service teachers, which includes untrained teachers now who are working in schools, and also graduate teachers and teachers in their first 5 years of teaching. So the growth team, we come and talk on podcasts like this. We give you teaching tips. If you'd like a few more teaching tips and a bunch of other industrial advice that's just for you, so especially for people in their first few years, you can join the New Educator Network, which is also that peer group that Bob's talking about there of people in their first few years of teaching. And there's some great advice and support through that group. So if you look up New Educator Network on Facebook, we'd love to have you join us there. And you'll see us out and about as well. So we come out to you, we'll see you at your graduate modules. There's always a team member, either me or Nicola or our colleague Christina will be at your first graduate module and your fourth one. And we'll come out to your schools as well. So keep an eye out, and if you see us around, come and have a chat.
That's excellent news, and we'll move straight into these teaching tips, which we are going to bring you across a couple of podcasts in two different sections. So, Nicola, let's start with co-creating classroom expectations.
Great, thanks, Bob. Look, teachers know how their students should be behaving in classrooms, and you'd be surprised to probably find that most of your students actually know how they should be behaving in order to be learning to their maximum potential. Look, a nice way to set your classroom expectations at the start of the year is to co-create them with your students. So rather than dictating the guidelines around how you want those students in your class to behave and how you will respond, if you do it together, then they're more inclined to take that on board. So you could do it as part of a lesson. So the lesson might look like, say you might split your students into small groups. You might give them 10 minutes to think about what kind of classroom environment helps them to learn. You would get them to write something down. So say an A3 page, divide it into 3 sections. You might have a column labelled, what does your classroom look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like when everyone is behaving in an appropriate and respectful manner? They can do that sort of brainstorm, and following on from that, each group could democratically choose their favourite idea from each column and then write these on a separate paper. So you're collecting some of those top sort of ideas. You might grab, 5 to 10 of them, depending on how much sort of response you've had. You could use a strategy such as giving each student a token, and they get to move around the room to the different groups, read what other students have put forward, put their token on the ideas that they like best, and then that can help you, maybe do like a top 10 list. You might choose to whittle it down to, say, 5, but getting that sort of top list of the expectations that everyone can work with is a really good starting point. Then you can discuss with your students, particularly that everyone has their own diverse learning needs. How can we support each other? What's the purpose for being in this classroom? How do we want to move forward together as a group? Because you're going to be together potentially for a whole year. You want to make sure that classroom environment's a really positive one. You might need to help students reword some of their ideas if they come up with things like, people need to shut up rather than talking when they shouldn't be. We'll use positive language to encourage everyone to perhaps just be quiet and actively listening to each other. So co-creating those classroom expectations gives a sense of ownership to all the students in the class, provides everyone with a chance to contribute, and like I said, they're more likely to be engaged and to be on task with what everyone's expecting, which is really positive.
Excellent, that's great. And Chloe, it's amazing how something as simple as how you start the day, how important that can be. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the tips that Nicola and I have for you are all around routines. And I think that both of us were chatting earlier and saying that once you get all of those routines in place, so much else just is easier. You don't have to think so much about it. And such a small one is that idea of meeting and greeting students at the classroom door. So at the beginning of every day or at the beginning of every lesson, you stand in the doorway and you greet each student by name as they enter your classroom. And it's a bit of a ritual. It's a good opportunity to set the tone for an orderly learning environment, and you're managing that transition then from outside of class to settling into learning. It's a really good strategy to build that respectful relationship between you and your students, and it gives you a chance to pick up on any students who might not quite be ready to learn before they actually get into your classroom and issues arise there.
That's probably talking about me there, that hit a bit close to home. So, Nicola, we talked about those setting the expectations together, and so how do you then move forward to reinforce those as the weeks and terms develop?
Yeah, so look, we've already set those expectations. A really good thing to do is actually put them in writing. It's great to get the students to maybe put those in writing, make some posters for around your room, and clearly display them so that you can easily refer to them when you're discussing behaviours with your students, or maybe you just need to reinforce something that perhaps is not happening in a room. You can quickly point to that. Earlier in the year, you should probably ensure that all your students thoroughly understand the expectations by making time to actually teach them what that looks like. You could even, if you wanted to get a bit of role play happening, students often enjoy that. That's a good way of teaching that. Look, another way you can do that is to start each week with, say, a short lesson focusing on a particular expectation. So, for example, we listen actively while others are talking. So you would elicit some examples and non-examples from your students and discuss any sort of grey areas and consequences for non-compliance so that everybody is clear about what those expectations are and possible consequences that you may be putting in place. Then you might like to let your students know that you'll be looking out for those who are displaying that behaviour over the week. In the coming days, you can regularly and publicly thank those students for their efforts. So you're not just responding to, a piece of work, you're actually responding to their behaviour in a really positive way. Thank you so much for speaking so politely. I often comment on students, when they show little things like they'll open a door for you or they'll hold a door for you. I always say, wow, such beautiful manners, thank you so much. So it's just doing that in your classroom and really highlighting what that behaviour is and thanking them for engaging in that behaviour. You might also consider tangible or intangible rewards. I know a bit of a go-to for a lot of teachers is the Freddo frog or a Minty. We probably, while it works well, we probably want to stay away from those sorts of treats because they don't quite match in with the healthy eating guidelines in schools these days. However, my experience I've found is lots of little fun sort of novelty stationery items, rubbers, pencils, etc. And then they can be utilising those in your classroom as well. So it has a really positive outcome.
So again, I'm all in favour of the Freddos, by the way, so you get my vote for that.
Me too.
Chloe, we've all wrestled with seating plans for various personal or work events. It must be pretty important in a classroom to get that seating plan right.
Yeah, there's no seating plan quite as tough as 32 year 7s in a standard build classroom. So look, you've probably already got a seating plan in place for your class. It means that you've got a bit of an orderly learning environment. You can manage all your social and your learning interactions effectively. But it's also part of creating a predictable routine for students so they know what they are stepping into when they step into your classroom. And the biggest part of this is it really reduces stress for students who might feel a bit anxious about finding someone to sit next to. So there are heaps of tools that you can use to manage your seating plan system and reduce the workload around this. You might want to update it multiple times every term, which can take quite a long time. So you might think about using an online program for it. So there are a bunch that will allow you to store the students' first names or their initials and your classroom seating arrangements. And then they can randomly reshuffle students when you click the button. And then you might just need to do a bit of fine tuning because even though it's random, it'll 100% be putting the two naughtiest kids right next to each other every single time. So you'll just need to move that around to make sure that everyone's going to be happy. And then you can not be spending as much time with the easy parts. So you might want to try out clickschool.co.uk. They run a seating plan program through there, or megaseatingplan.com. And I think Nick had one as well, Nicola, that you've used through Sector.
Yeah, so I can only talk about my experience with Sector, but I do know other schools have different programs. But within Sector, there's actually a little section where you can create a classroom layout that reflects what you've got in your classroom. So place your desks where they are. And then you can actually click and drag your students' photographs into, because Sector uploads all the kids' photos, so you can actually click and drag each student's little photograph into where they sit. Now, it does take a little bit of, it's not massively time consuming, but the beauty of this is, particularly if you've got a relief teacher coming in for your class, you can print a copy of that plan, leave it with your lesson, and not only does the relief teacher know that there's a seating plan, but they know exactly who belongs where, and not just by name, but by face, because kids will always tell you that their name is something other than what it is. So just check out some of the programs that are being run in schools, like Sector, Compass, etc., and see if those other ones have got a little tool for setting up a classroom plan.
And once you've got that plan in place, Nicola, I might stay with you because a fair bit of planning's gone in. You've got your kids seated, you know where they are and who they are. What about actually getting the lesson underway?
You look, and there's lots of ways to do this effectively, Bob, but a signal to begin. Just some sort of signal. It can be verbal, non-verbal, etc., to let the students in your class know that you are ready to start your lesson. All teachers do this differently, but your signal to begin should be routinely the same each time. Me personally, I was always one for standing at the front of the room and just waiting in silence. And the students learnt very quickly that was my signal to begin. They would sort of elbow, nudge, whisper to the person next to them to quieten down. I might have to say, okay, guys, I'm ready now. Quiet, and then I do not start my lesson until everybody's eyes are on me. So it's really important that you wait for the students to give you that attention. Look, there's lots of other ways you can do it. One hand raised, and then you wait a few seconds for silence, and then the students return that signal, so they raise their hand to let you know that they're ready. You can do one hand raised and then use a phrase such as, so finishing up your conversation, voice is off, eyes to me in 1, 2, 3. Young people always respond well to the count. I love this in a primary school setting in particular, but a clapping pattern that maybe the teacher initiates and then the students respond to. That's always a little bit of fun. Some teachers put both hands on their head and they'll wait for the students to copy them. That also makes sure that their hands are free in order to focus on what's going to be said. This is a cute one too. Teachers can use a phrase like, Avengers, assemble. And then the students have to respond with something like, say, assemble, assemble, assemble. Again, might be better in the primary context, but that's always a little bit of fun. And in a music class, you could utilise the instruments that are there. So use an instrument or a tambourine or a drum just to indicate that you're ready. I was telling Chloe earlier today, I had a colleague who used to have a little bell on her desk, and she would ring the little bell, and the students responded really well to that. However, the other teachers in her block didn't really enjoy the bell. They found it a little bit annoying. So maybe just take into consideration the people around you when you decide what your signal is going to be. But it doesn't matter what you choose, just make sure you commit to it fully. And like I said earlier, do not start talking until the students have actually quietened down and that you've got their attention.
That's fantastic. Very, very interesting stuff, even for the people who've never been in a classroom, other than on the other end, which would be me, of course. Now, Chloe, you've got the lessons underway, and obviously lessons can shift from activity to activity. What are the best ways to manage that?
Yeah, I think as teachers, we're probably not even aware of how often during the day students do switch between activities or even physical spaces. So we call them transitions. So the idea of a transition might be as small as going from like a small group brainstorm to a class discussion, or a really major transition like walking into class after a very chaotic lunch break. And often these points in the school day are the most likely to go wrong. So it might just be that accidental elbow or just time wasted looking for equipment. But by putting in those routines around transitions, you can manage them a lot more effectively. So before you start this, or anything in a classroom, before you ever want to speak to a student, use your signal to begin to gain all of the students' attention. So one of the ones that Nicola's just been through. When we do transitions, start with a when direction. So not yet, but when I ask you to move, and then share where they'll be going and what equipment they'll need. So we are going to return to our usual seats and take out a pencil and a ruler. And I would usually repeat that at least once. I'm a high school teacher, seriously, probably more like 2 or 3 times. So not yet, but when I ask you to move, we're going to return to our usual seats and we're going to take out a pencil and a ruler. If I'm looking around and nobody has made eye contact with me, I might check a few key players. I might say, hey, Johnny, where are we going to go once we move? And Johnny will say, our usual seats. And then I say, Sophie, what are we going to do once we get there? What equipment do we need? We're going to take out a pen and a ruler.
It's always Johnny who's not listening, isn't it?
It is. And so once I've got that down, I know that they know what we're doing. If those two know what we're doing, probably everybody does. And so then I ask them to make the transition. So, okay, you all look ready to move. Let's do that now. And once they've moved, there'll be a bit of a kerfuffle by the time they all find their pens and their rulers and their seats. Then I regain their attention with the signal to begin, and then we're ready to start the activity. And it's one of those routines that when you first start teaching, I know when I was in my first year of teaching, I had to think about it all the time, manage those transitions, make sure you get it right. When, where, what, and then it gets to the point where it's just routine, and it's one of those things in your teaching toolkit that just happens without even needing to think about it. And you would be really surprised if you weren't doing that at how much more chaotic your classroom environment would be.
Well, clever bit coming up here, transition to question and answer procedures. Nicola, what are some of the processes teachers can use when it comes to the questions from students or you're seeking answers from them?
Yeah, look, strategic questioning is a key skill for teachers in order to maximise student learning. And there's a lot that's been written about how to structure questions, and that could be a whole separate podcast. But just to mention, sort of Bloom's taxonomy, that sort of hierarchy of different types of questioning springs to mind. However, no matter how great your questions are, your lesson will be derailed if your students are talking while you ask them those questions, or if it's only the same few students who are listening and then sort of calling out answers. So look, there's lots of different ways that you can go about this, but it's important to develop, teach and then reinforce the types of questioning and response procedures that you want. So look, for a couple of examples. The cold call. That's let students know that the next question will be a cold call. That means you're going to call on any student in the class to respond. And you can use random generators. There's online ones that you can utilise, but the old sort of traditional one is like the pop sticks in a jar. So you have a bunch of pop sticks, you've got a student name on each pop stick, and because you do this consistently, students know that their name can be drawn out at any moment to answer a question. That actually is a really good way to keep students on task because they're aware that they could be called on at any time rather than you waiting for them to put their hand up. The Think, Pair, Share, I think, is highly underrated. I use this a lot in my classroom. The Think, Pair, Share is where you pose a question and the students get time to think about the answer themselves before they turn to a peer next to them and discuss that question with the peer and see what the peer was thinking before they decide that they want to share that response. And giving students that time, that take-up time to really think about what it is they want to say, because they're not put on the spot, is really important. And it builds their confidence to know that A, they're probably on the right track, and B, good on them for actually offering that response within the classroom context. So Think, Pair, Share is one of my favourites. I've seen this work done really well, and that's the mini whiteboards. Maybe 20 years ago we were using mini blackboards, but mini whiteboards. So each person in the class gets their little whiteboard and a marker and an eraser. You might ask the whole class a question. You give them a little bit of time to think before they write each student writes their own answer on their little whiteboard. And then at the count of 3, they can turn their board around and the teacher can get a bit of a gauge as to how many students, A, understood the question in order to answer correctly, it didn't know the answer or maybe misinterpreted. And then the teacher can then use that feedback to go back and either rephrase the question, thank the students for their responses and move on, or, maybe having to address part of a lesson again because most students misinterpreted. This is one I think maybe not as many people out there may be aware of. It's called pose, pause, pounce and bounce. And I said that slowly because it's a little bit of a tongue twister. So you pose a question. You pause for some think time. Then you pounce on a random student for their answer. Obviously that's a metaphor. And you can do the pop sticks if you want to choose someone randomly. But you immediately bounce their response to another student to ask if they agree or if they perhaps wanted to add anything to that. And look, there's lots of others, and I know that people are using some great online quizzes such as Kahoot in their classrooms as well, and that's a really great tool for engaging students. But look, the question response method you choose should be suitable for your learning task and the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. You might use multiple different methods in a single lesson if you think that's going to work with your students. Look, regardless, students should understand exactly what's expected of them, regardless of which method you're using.
And that is fascinating. So I was listening so intently that I almost missed my own cue then. But the structures you've put in place thus far, obviously complicated enough. But now, how do you manage frequent exits and arrivals in the classroom? Is there a process you use to sort of manage those departures and arrivals?
Yeah, look, this is such a tough one, Bob, and every school and every teacher is a bit different. But we've all been in that situation where you've met all your students at the door and they've come in and they've sat down and they're ready to go, and then you're just about to launch into the body of your lesson and somebody desperately needs to fill up their water bottle or go to the toilet. And you're there thinking, but we just had lunch 5 minutes ago. So it is a tricky space. It's hard to balance, you need that orderly learning environment in your own classroom and a safe bathroom space for all of the students, but also balancing that with respect for students' own self-regulation abilities. And those kind of expectations around leaving the classroom are going to be really different for an early childhood teacher versus someone teaching senior secondary and everything in between. So wherever you and potentially your school, if there's a whole school kind of idea or policy around it, wherever you fall on students leaving the classroom during class time, the main thing is that your expectations are really clearly communicated to students. So, for example, we don't leave class in the 10 minutes after break, might be your expectation. And you just have to remind students when they ask you. We come to class with our drink bottles full, so we don't need to leave class to fill them up. Or bathroom breaks should be only taken during break times. Or only one person leaves the classroom at a time, and you might want to keep an eye out to see just who's leaving the classrooms around yours as well, who's seen who out the window and wants to go for a wander. Or you might have a partner rule where they've got to go with someone at random that you've picked, so that, again, it's not such a great and fun time. Another one that I've found to be really effective is a timer, so it breaks are 5 minutes or less so we don't miss out on learning time, and we just write that up on the board. And probably the biggest thing, the most effective thing to reduce bathroom and drink bottle breaks is before the student leaves the classroom, you just ask them for their mobile phone and you hold on to that until they get back. And I can just about promise you, if you're not doing this already, bring it in and you'll find that the bathroom breaks and the interruptions are reduced by about 90%. It's fantastic. I can't speak highly enough for that one. So whatever you do decide to do, just make sure that students understand what the rules are. They're the same every single time. And there's obviously always going to be exceptions, but that it's clearly communicated and you're predictable.
Excellent. And then even with adults, sometimes struggle with admitting they need assistance, presumably in a class, especially when you've got some of the largest class sizes in the country. You're going to have kids in there who need a bit of extra help, and getting them to admit that can be a bit of a challenge. How do you overcome that, Nicola?
Yeah, look, at some point all learners are going to need help with their learning. It's important that you share with students how you would like them to seek help. And I made reference earlier today with Chloe about a particular student I had one year, quite a few years ago now, and I was so I was so touched by his enthusiasm for a particular task that we were working on. However, he was quite demanding. So as soon as he wanted help, he wanted it now and immediately. But as you mentioned, Bob, I had 32 students in that Year 9 class, and everybody wanted a little bit of support. So those processes, again, made clear and being consistent with them, it's really important so students know how they can actually address their needs. Look, 3 simple strategies. See 3 before me. So when a student encounters a challenge, they have to seek assistance from 3 different people before they come and ask you. And speaking to a peer is really valuable because they're speaking the same language or on the same wavelength, and quite often that peer can actually help them answer or solve that problem. You're also teaching problem-solving skills, aren't you, which is a lifelong skill. So see 3 before you go and see the teacher. Second one is board book buddy. So a similar sort of approach. Before asking a teacher, a student works through the 3 Bs. So is there something written on the board that can help me? Is there an instruction on there that I didn't read before? Is there some guidance? Is there a page number? Is there something on there, because there usually is, let's be honest, that the student hasn't read and can actually read and then answer their own question? Second one is a book. If you've got textbooks in your classroom, dictionaries, whatever it might be, ask them to go and check in a book. It could be online on a website if the students have access to computers and the internet at your school is good. And then the third option is a buddy. Again, is there someone in the classroom here that I can go and ask? Kids are pretty good at knowing who the, say, more well-performing students are in a particular class. So, they might even be guided to go and ask one of those students who tends to know what they're doing to get that feedback before they ask the teacher. And the last one, and this is used a lot even with adult learners, it's the parking lot. So during a lesson or your activity, students might write their question on a post-it note, and you've developed already a parking place. Could be on a wall, it could be on the whiteboard, it could be on a piece of poster paper, and you go and put your question there, and that stops any interruptions in the flow of your lesson, and then the teacher can address those questions from that board or from that piece of paper at an appropriate point in the lesson. So just 3 easy things that you can set up in your classroom. But consistency is key, Bob.
And you've done all of this magnificent work. You've got your lesson plan perfect. You've got your seating plan. You've had no interruptions. Nobody's gone in and out, not even once in the lesson. And you've delivered a really successful session of information giving to your students. But then how do you make sure, Chloe, that they've actually taken that information in?
Yeah, I think most people have had that experience where you think you've just delivered a fantastic activity, great learning has gone on, and then you get to the tests, a week or 2 later, and none of the kids knew the answer to that particular sort of topic. So that check for understanding is a really important step for us. So it's just that idea that you want to make sure that students are learning what you think that you're teaching them as you go, rather than waiting till the end. So, some of it is as simple as earlier when I was talking about managing a transition. You give the instruction and then you pick a couple of kids at random to test if they actually listen to what you just said. That's a little check for understanding. You might teach a concept, very short idea, and then get a little thermometer happening. So you get students to put their thumbs up if they understand it, sort of wave the hand if they're not 100% sure, and thumbs down if they've got absolutely no idea. And you've got that shared understanding, because you explicitly taught these routines, that anyone who's got their thumbs up is confident that they understand the concept well enough that they can explain it in their own words. So then you've got that person there who might be able to reiterate what you've just learnt. You might have students respond privately to a question, as we spoke about earlier, using mini whiteboards, which gives you a really good idea of who's learnt a concept and who's still on the way. And one that is really powerful to sort of end a lesson is an exit card. So you can just have students, it doesn't have to be complicated, you don't have to print anything or make any special resource. I would just give each of my students a post-it note. I'd write a question on the board that relates to the key idea that I wanted every student to learn that lesson. I want them all to have walked out and they know that. And I say, can you answer this question on your post-it note and write your name above it, and do that before you pack up? And then I stand at the door as the students leave and I pick up all the post-it notes, and at the end of my lesson I've got 32 post-it notes in front of me, and they should all have the correct answer to the question, you would hope. But if they don't, if only half the class have got it, that's then what I know I need to start my next lesson with. So it helps you with that lesson sequencing as well. And then, so that's pretty small. You might do a little bit larger checks for understanding, something like having the students create a bit of a summary, so a 280 character tweet that sums up what they've learnt that lesson, a 1 minute video blog, they can go outside and film one another, a letter to their teacher or their parents explaining what they learnt, depending on, perhaps that's more like at the end of a few lessons worth of work. So they're just a few ideas for checking for understanding. If you Google check for understanding, you'll find a huge list of all these different ways to do it. And again, the main thing is students know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and you do it in the same manner each time so that it doesn't take a lot of time to be reteaching those routines to them.
That's fantastic, and thank you to you both. The whole process is fascinating. Gives an indication. I know that most people listening to this, we do get non-teachers who listen. I think they'll find it particularly fascinating. And for teachers, of course, some reminders there of some really good practice. And I hope that helps you all as teachers. Our next podcast will contain some more teaching tips. So thank you very much for listening to Western Teacher Live. And in particular, thank you to Growth Team Coordinator Chloe Hosking and Growth Team Officer Nicola Sorrell.
Members can access a complimentary simple will where appropriate. For more information or details about a complex will, visit sstuwa.org.au/wills.